I'll be honest, over the last little bit, we've definitely been talking about a lot of short course specific swimming, from the Swimming World Cup and that being in short course meters, or the NCAA season starting up and that all being in short course yards. You might be getting dizzy from all of the turns in these shorter pools, but we do have a big long course meet coming up in just a few days, the US Open. There are going to be a ton of very fast swimmers competing at this meet, and it's going to be really interesting to see where a lot of our elite swimmers are right now and how seriously they're taking this meet in particular. Some swimmers are definitely going to just train right through it as if it were any old meet, and that will come with the results that you're probably going to expect. But there are also going to be a decent handful of swimmers that are going to handle this as more of a mid-season style meet, maybe give it a few days rest or a quick drop taper to try and put up some respectable times. I think we can definitely expect this from a lot of our NCAA swimmers that are either just coming off of a mid-season meet or just about to go into a mid-season meet, so that'll be something to keep an eye on. But just like we did before the Swimming World Cup started, let's go through every single event entry from the 2025 US Open and see who exactly is swimming what and what we might be able to expect from every event. Before we go super heavily into the entries, I do want to lead with some meet information. It's going to be running from December 3rd through December 6th, so like I said, in just a few days here, and of course it's going to be a long course, and it is going to be held in Texas, so because of that, we're definitely going to see a lot of University of Texas swimmers on these psych sheets, which makes sense because the meet is literally in their home pool, and if you were planning on swimming in this meet yourself and you haven't entered, well, you missed the deadline. And I know I'm going to be getting this question in the comments. This meet will be available to stream on Peacock. That's what's listed in the meet information. I don't know if it'll be available anywhere else or if there is going to be any option for international viewers, because I know oftentimes Peacock, since it's part of NBC, does block things geographically. I'm not super sure if there's a huge amount of options outside of that. Hopefully there'll at least be some way to watch race videos after the meet if you can't watch it live. And as always, this video is brought to you by Still No One, and our first event here is the women's 1500. Now, the first thing you might notice is actually a swimmer that isn't present, which is Katie Ledecky. She's not going to be swimming at this meet, probably one of the bigger stars that isn't here, and she does normally swim at US Open Championships, so that is at least somewhat notable, but in her absence, Jillian Cox is the #1 seed. She got a solid 10 seconds over Kate Hurst, and it looks like, looking at the entries here, it's probably going to be a race between these two, which, like I said, they are both University of Texas swimmers. There are a lot of them on here. They have the home pool advantage. They have the fastest entry times. Probably going to be a bit of a battle between these two, with Jillian Cox having the edge, and she is coming off of a pretty good mid-season meet as well. From the men's side, we have a really big battle brewing at the top. We can see Ahmed Jowdy and Bobby Fink have a sizable lead over the next fastest entrants with 14:34 and 14:36, and they have a lot of pedigree between these two. Ahmed Jowdy is the reigning world champion, where he swam that time. Fink placed third in that race with that 14:36, but Bobby Fink is the 2024 Olympic champion and the world record holder in this event, and we don't really need to compare too much of where they're going to be in their training and how beaten down they are, because currently these two are training together at the University of Florida, Fink as a pro and Jowdy as a collegiate swimmer. So it's going to be really interesting to see these two throw down, and I can't imagine what those distance practices look like. Over in the women's 50 backstroke, we have a pretty tight and competitive field, as we've come to expect from US women's backstroke. The field here is headlined by Catherine Burkhoff as the only swimmer under 27 seconds with a 26:97. Behind her is Reagan Smith, who you really can't discount in any backstroke race. She is seated at a 27:20, which again, as she trains out of Texas, we really should keep an eye on that potential home pool advantage. Right behind her, just 11 100ths behind, is Leah Shackley with that 27:31 and Ingrid Wilm in 27:48. So those top four are pretty bunched up. Catherine Burkhoff definitely stands out as the only swimmer under that 27-second barrier. I think the race is mainly going to be between her and Smith, but of course with these two in decent striking range, especially Shackley with Smith, I could see anyone really getting their hand on the wall at the very end. So 50, it could come down to a touch. A lot of interesting names over in the men's 50 backstroke. That one is headlined by Pieter Kotze, who is a 24:17. Right behind him is Shane Costas in that 24:23, and Hubert Koch, if you were watching during the Swimming World Cup, Cup, that name is still hot on your mind. 2450. Koch is obviously much more of a 200 backstroker, but as we saw during that World Cup, he's definitely working on that speed. He did manage to sweep the 50 backstrokes during all 3 stops of that World Cup. Koch is definitely a swimmer that had a pretty big breakout during the 2025 season. It'll be interesting to see where he's at now after he made some major strides in those backstroke events over the last summer. And another name that is also jumping out amid some pretty heavy hitters beyond those top 3 is all the way down here at 13th seed Hunter Armstrong. That is obviously a name that we are very familiar with in backstroke, especially sprint backstroke, but he was absent last season, which is why he's a bit further down on these psych sheets. He was out of training and racing for a considerable period of time, started ramping back up kind of after US Nationals. He didn't even swim at that meet. He's was able to get back into training, and this is going to be one of the first times we're really seeing him hopefully compete with a solid training load. I think he raced a grand total of 1 meet, the Tier Pro Championships, basically the finale of the Tier Pro Swim Series, where he threw down some respectable times, but nothing earth-shattering. So I would imagine that he's going to place a bit higher than 13th at this meet. Now, over in the women's 400 freestyle, we see our first appearance of none other than world record holder Summer McIntosh, who has a ridiculous lead in the seed times over everyone else with her world record time of 3:54.18. Jillian Cox is the next fastest with a 4:07.34, and Summer McIntosh is currently training now with the University of Texas with those 2 Texas collegiate swimmers, Jillian Cox and Erin Gemmel. So it's another Longhorns taking the top 3 there. This is pretty clearly going to be Summer McIntosh's race. Not really a question of whether or not she's going to win, more so how fast she's going to be, because we did not get to see her swim during the most recent World Cup. She was originally entered to swim all 3 stops. Makes sense. She had a chance to win a ton of money and swim in front of a home crowd during that final stop in Toronto, but she originally got sick, and then in the process of trying to diagnose what she had, one of the things that the doctors recommended was trying out a spinal tap, because they really could not figure out what kind of illness she had. That spinal tap, they're testing for something specific. I don't remember exactly what it is, and I am clearly not a doctor, so I'm not even going to try and remember it at you, but that spinal tap had some kind of complication and made her even more sick after the point where she probably would have recovered from whatever she originally had. Obviously a very frustrating experience that she's since opened up about. Hopefully she's back to 100%, so it is going to be interesting to see what kind of form she's in, because obviously not being able to race with all those illnesses and complications meant that she was not going to be able to train as well. So it's also going to be interesting to see how much prep she's going to have going into this meet, if she's going to have any rest, or if she's just training through trying to make up for that little bit of lost time. Only time will tell. The men's 400 freestyle is most likely going to be one of the biggest dogfights of this entire meet. It is absolutely loaded, and I love a great race over 400 meters. I think that is one of my favorite distances to watch. Sitting at the top of this event here is Rex Maurer with that 3:43.33. That is the time that sits as the US Open record. Now, Aaron Shackle is right behind him. He did miss out on making the US Worlds team over the summer, but then during that same tier championship meet that Hunter Armstrong was at that I was talking about, he went a new personal best of 3:45.03. Luka Mijatovic was the one who got second behind Maurer at those World Championship trials, and he has been on fire because he's still only 16 years old. He's doing what young teenagers do and just shedding time like crazy. He recently went a 4:08 in the 500 free. He's seated decently high there. Kieran Smith, can never count him out in a 400 meter race, especially in season. He is someone who can just not throw down ridiculously fast world-beating times, but is always just consistently there and racing all the time, it feels like. Carson Foster, another incredibly fast 500-yard freestyler. Ahmed Jowdy, someone who more specializes in the longer distance races, but can go down to a 400. Same with Bobby Fink, we see down in 10th. Luke Hobson is kind of the opposite story, more of a straight 200 freestyler, can dial up to a good 400, probably more of a training event for him to be good at that 200. Same reason we'll sometimes see him entered in a 100 freestyle, same principle on the other side of it. And Leon Marchand in 9th seed, someone who is the fastest ever over 500 yards, mostly because of his insane underwater skills, but has a respectable 3:48 seed time here. And I believe that was one that he swam in a morning in a timed finals. I could be off on that, but he was swimming this one for fun at a Tier Pro swim series. It'll be interesting to see how fast he can go, if he can make that A final and really race with some of the big dogs there. But as you can tell from the number of names that I just ran through in rapid fire there, that is a very loaded field. This should be an incredibly fun race to watch. I am particularly excited to see what Luka Mijatovic can do. He just went a big personal best in the 500-yard freestyle. This is the equivalent meters event, and he's clearly in a good form, so I wouldn't be surprised if he can maybe try and knock down a little bit, or who knows, at this point, maybe a lot of it a time from that 3:45, and I just want to see how fast this kid can go. Over in the women's 200 IM, we have our silver and bronze medalists from the 2025 World Championships, Alex Walsh and Mary Sophie Harvey, as our top 2 seeds, the only swimmers seeded under 209 with a 208.45 and a 208.78. That should be an interesting battle. I think Alex Walsh has the edge here. Not only does she have the faster entry time, but she did just sweep all 3 stops of this in the short course meters version of the event during the most recent Swimming World Cup. And of course, this is another one where notably we do not have the gold medalist and world record holder Summer McIntosh in this field, but in her absence, these two should have an interesting battle, with Phoebe Bacon also potentially trying to throw down a fast swim here. And another notable absence is Leon Marchand, the men's world record holder in the 200 IM, not swimming that event. Neither is silver medalist Shane Casas. We do have a returning bronze medalist though, Hubert Koch, and without those 2 top dogs in the race, he has a pretty healthy gap in the entry times here over Finlay Knox, who is the 2nd seed with a 157.25. Then the field tightens up pretty considerably with a couple other 157s, with Kieran Smith being literally 1/100 behind Knox on the psych sheets. And I would keep an eye on Baylor Nelson. He just had a very good mid-season meet, particularly in the 400 IM. We'll talk about that, but he made some pretty big drops. He's a swimmer that I'm expecting was rested for mid-season, is just going to try and hold that rest into the US Open, get some solid long course swims. So he's a swimmer that I'm going to be, maybe not to win. I think Coach has probably got this locked up, but keep an eye on to see just how fast he's able to go, and maybe he will be able to put some pressure up on Coach here. In the women's 50 breaststroke, we have a trio of swimmers that are seated under 31 seconds, and they are led by Skylar Smith, who has a somewhat healthy lead with a seed time of 30.46. In a somewhat similar story over on the men's side of things, we have 4 swimmers who are under 27 seconds. Van Mathias is leading the pack over there with a 26.76, and then the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th are all bunched up 26.89 through to 26.94, and then the gap starts to widen after them. This will be interesting to see how this top battle plays out. Just like the 50 backstroke for women we were talking about earlier, and the women's 50 breaststroke, this is a race that very well could come down to the final touch over those 50 meters. In the women's 50 freestyle, we see Gretchen Walsh leading the way with her seed time of 23.91. Then just behind her is Kate Douglas in a 24.04. Then behind them, there's a bit of a gap, but you can never really count out Simone Manuel. She's in a 24.39, just barely ahead of Maxine Parker in that 24.41. So kind of have a tight bunching between 1 and 2, and then 3 and 4. I wouldn't be surprised if Simone Manuel can try and take a run up at the top swimmers, because she is someone who is known to race when she really needs to, and I feel like in a big loaded field like this, she's going to be ready to go. Another swimmer that I think should be highlighted just because of some pretty good mid-season results we saw recently is Anna Moschk out of University of Virginia. She's seated at 24.92. 100 and 200 freestyle are probably going to be some better events for her, because in those 2 events she just had some insane drops and really fast swims over in the NCAA and in yards. Also, in case you are confused, Lily King, This is a different Lily King. This one only has one L. It's not the breaststroker. She's not out of retirement. Over in the men's 50 freestyle, we have 9 swimmers on this psych sheet seated under 22 seconds. It starts with Jack Alexi with his 21:32 and kind of that 21 mid to low range. Kind of go up to Andre Barnan at 21:44. Once we hit Santo Condorelli in third, we start transitioning into the 21 highs, 21:68. We hit 21.7s, 21.8s, and then 21.9s, which is held up by Caleb Dressel in the 9th seed. Caleb Dressel is probably one of the swimmers that I am the most intrigued by before this meet starts, because we did see him swim during the Paris Olympics where he had some pretty good results and some that were a little bit more mixed. Then he didn't really race at all during the 2025 season. He raced at like 2 meets, 1 pro swim series, and then that tier pro championships, which is where this seed time comes from. He only raced the 50 free and the 50 butterfly at that meet, but that 50 butterfly was good enough to put him on the US national team for the year, which is even more impressive considering the fact that it sounds like he was basically winging his training at the time, wasn't really super locked in for that year, more focusing on his family, which, you know, fair enough. I would highly recommend listening to the most recent Swim Swam podcast interview that Dressel did with Mel Stewart, because it shed a ton of light into where his training was at during this time, and more importantly, what it's going to look like going forward, which is why I'm so interested in what these results are going to be. Because if you didn't know, Caleb Dressel has switched coaches, and it seems like he's also taking a lot more of a sports science-based approach to a lot of other things, like his time in the weight room and his recovery and all that kind of stuff. He's taking a lot more of a focused approach than what we've seen from him in the past, basically just changing things up, which I always advocate for athletes to do, to try and change things up a little bit, because I think that can have a huge boost in their performance after they've been doing more or less the same thing for a very extended period of time. I'm also very interested because I genuinely believe that Dressel still has a lot of good results left in him. I know that there are going to be a ton of comments, whether it's on Swim Swam articles about this meet or comments in my own videos, basically calling Dressel wash and that he should just retire, which I don't agree with. I think that he still has a bit left in the tank, especially if he focuses down more to the sprints, which I think a lot of people are kind of expecting him to do. And it sounds like he's on the fence. He wants to see where he's at. If he can still be competitive in more events going up to 100, not needing to just do 50s, he'll do that. If it seems like he really needs to just focus in on the 50 free, 50 fly, he'll do that. But I am really excited to see what he does at this meet as kind of a measuring stick, one, for just how much he's progressed in his training at this point, and 2, potentially how much this new training is helping him. It's also going to be interesting because in the past, Dressel's one of these swimmers that has swam pretty slow in season, back when he's doing the more old school style of University of Florida training, where he's just being absolutely broken down and not swimming particularly fast until he gets a taper. That might still be the case. That might just be how his body operates during heavy training, or we might actually see a bit more speed than we're expecting out of Dressel at this point in the season. Only time will tell. Over in the women's 50 butterfly, Gretchen Walsh is the #1 seed, and it's not even particularly close. She's seeded with her world record time of 54.60, ahead of Regan Smith, the backstroker, in a 56.52. Gretchen Walsh is going to win this race. Now, you may have noticed sitting in the 7th seed is Summer McIntosh. She is obviously incredibly fast over 200 meters of butterfly, not really much of a 100 swimmer over any stroke. I'm guessing this is an entry as more of a training event for her 200 butterfly, but it will be very interesting to see what she can do in this 100 distance. I just looked it up right now because I was curious. Summer McIntosh is currently seated at a 58.58. When she went a 201.99 in that 200 butterfly during the 2025 World Championships, she was out in a 58.41. So she can probably be a little bit faster than that. Unlike the women's 100 butterfly, the men should be a lot more competitive for who's actually going to win this race. The #1 seed right now by a healthy margin is Ilya Haroun, 50.07. He's been looking incredible during the NCAA season right now and also the Swimming World Cup, so he is going to be pretty tough to beat. But we do also have Shane Casas in that 50.51. Shane Casas' 100 butterfly has always been of interest to a lot of swimming fans. Doesn't always get the chance to swim it at big meets because he normally has some kind of schedule conflict, or he's choosing not to swim it just to manage his load because there's normally going to be a couple other Americans that are going to make a team ahead of him. He wants to focus on other events. Totally understandable, but all the swim nerds want to see just how fast he can go in a 100 butterfly. Any chance you see him on the entry list for it is always at least a little bit interesting. Right behind him, Hubert Koch, and rounding out the sub 51 second swimmers is Dare Rose with that 50.93. Now, if we go further down on the psych sheet, we have our world record holder Caleb Dressel in the 11th seed. Basically take everything I just said in the 50 freestyle and bring it over here. That sums up my opinions pretty well. I think he has the potential to be pretty quick in this, and I'm interested to see what he does nonetheless. And right behind him, Leon Marchand. This is the first of a few more sprinty events that we're seeing Marchand do at this meet, which is going to be pretty interesting. I think he did this once before in 2024. He did a meet where he did a lot more 100s of stroke, which I assume is Bob Bowman 400 IM training. You might remember we just saw Summer McIntosh in the 100 butterfly. I'm assuming it's a similar principle here. Speaking of the 400 IM, we have the women's 400 IM, where we do not have world record holder Summer McIntosh, and spoiler alert, the same is the case for the men's 400 IM, where Leon Marchand, just like the 200 IM, is not swimming it. But we do have Emma Wyant as the top seed with a 4:33.95, with Mary Sophie Harvey just behind her in that 4:35.56. This also is not all of the entries. I just had to cut it kind of weird because of how it was formatted on the actual entry sheet. With the absence of Marchand in the men's 400 IM, we have Bobby Fink as our top seed, 4:07.46, just ahead of Carson Foster in a 4:07.92. You may have forgotten, but last summer, Bobby Fink actually won the US national title in this event, but didn't swim it at Worlds because it overlaps with the 1500, and I guess he just didn't want to do that double or whatever. It's actually perfectly understandable. Carson Foster and Bobby Fink. This should be an interesting highlight race between these two. Rex Maurer also has a potential to be pretty quick. He's been throwing down some pretty quick 400 IMs in yards. And Baylor Nelson, like I mentioned, had a fantastic invite, and I think he is going to be a bit faster than this time. And we'll see just how fast he can go if he can try and contend with the top dogs. And if we go a bit further down, I of course need to mention Luka Mijatovic. For all the reasons I was interested in him in the 400 freestyle, still interested in what he's going to do in the 400 IM, just because he's still in incredibly good form, still dropping time because he's so young, and let's just see how fast he can go. In the women's 100 breaststroke, we have Kate Douglas as our #1 seed with a 1:05.27. Mona McSherry is the only other swimmer under 1:06, just barely, with a 1:05.99. Douglas has definitely been dipping down into his 100 breaststroke more and more. She is the world silver medalist and was also racing this during the Swimming World Cup, where she swept the event and won the Triple Crown. Over in the men's 100 breaststroke, we have a litany of swimmers under 1 minute, but only 2 under 59 seconds. Those are Dennis Petrashov and Campbell McKean, both at 58.88 and 58.96. So they are very bunched up. Josh Matheny also right there on the border of that barrier in a 59.15. Then there's a bit of a jump up into the 59 mids after them, and of course we might notice Leon Marchand as the 8th seed, just under that 1 minute barrier, 59.95. And like I said, he's swimming a lot more 100s at this meet than we normally see him, probably trying to train a little bit more speed over the different strokes. Nature Monpre also in 7th seed with that 59.89. He just had a huge 100 breast swim during the Texas midseason meet, so he is probably going to be a bit faster here. I feel like he definitely has the potential to dip into the 58s. In the women's 100 backstroke, Regan Smith is the #1 seed with a time of 57.35. She's also the world record holder in this event, but even Regan Smith is not invincible in domestic fields in this event, just because there's always someone waiting. With how many talented US backstrokers there are, Catherine Burkhoff is the most obvious culprit to try and take her down if she's really on her game, and Smith is just a little bit off her game. She's the 2nd seed with a 58.13, but there are other talented backstrokers in this field that could try and make a run at it. bit, though Regan Smith is the favorite. We talked about him in the 50 backstroke. Peter Kotze in the men's 100 backstroke is the #1 seed with a rare time under 52 seconds, 51.85. He was on fire in backstroke, like I said last summer. Hubert Koch is right behind him, 52.20. Kotze won the world title in this event with this time, while Koch was second. Koch, like I said, a lot more geared towards that 200 backstroke, but they should hopefully have a pretty good race, and I could see either one of them winning, though it's hard to go against the one who is currently sitting with the #1 seed and the reigning world champion. As we make our way down, we do have a ton of other talented backstrokers, all the way down to Leon Marchand as the 18th seed. Like I said, this is the third and final 100-meter distance that we're seeing him race, as he seems to be training more of that speed, this time in backstroke. The women's 200 freestyle has the potential to be pretty interesting here. We have our #1 seed, Erin Gemmel, with the 155.23, and Anna Poplawski is the only other swimmer under 156 in a 155.70. A little over a second behind Poplawski is Simone Manuel in the 156.90, though, like I said in the 50, don't necessarily count her out because she can definitely get up there and race if she needs to. And like I also said in the 50, Anna Most from UVA is someone who I think has the potential to drop a decent chunk of time here. 158.34 is what she's entered at, but she just had a pretty phenomenal swim over in the yards pool. Pretty similar to the men's 400 free, the men's 200 free is similarly stacked. We of course have Luke Hobson and Gabriel Jett as the top two. These were our top two finishers during the US National Championships, and the ones that both made the final at the World Championships, with Hobson getting second only to David Popovich. Rex Maurer, Kieran Smith, Chris Giuliano, Luka Mijatovic, those are all prime candidates to try and take down these top two, though Luke Hobson has proven very tough to beat, and I think that he is definitely the favorite to win, not just because of him being #1 on the psych sheet, but also just because he has been swimming pretty good, particularly at the World Cups as well. He won the Triple Crown in this event, which shows that he's been able to execute very well in this event, even in season. No idea how much rest he may or may not be having for this meet. If he has a little bit of rest, I think he's definitely a solid favorite. The women's 800 freestyle, we once again have Jillian Cox as the #1 seed, probably a bit healthier of a lead on the entry times that compared to the 1500, at least if you break it down by percentage. 8:19.88 is her entry time, and of course we do not have Katie Ledecky swimming at this meet, and we also do not have Summer McIntosh swimming in this event despite swimming at this meet, so I think Jillian Cox is a pretty safe favorite to win this race. Over in the men's 800 freestyle, just like in the 1500, we have Ahmed Jowdy and Bobby Fink leading the way. Now, I think this is going to be another pretty big dogfight, but you may mention that the gap between these two on the entry time seems pretty big. I do want to point out one thing. You might remember that last summer, Team USA had a lot of swimmers that were affected by illness, and I think Bobby Fink was definitely one of them. He did not have a particularly fast swim in the 800 freestyle. It seemed like he had more so recovered later in the meet during the 1500, which is why he was able to go a season best time, which is what his entry at this meet is from. But this is actually his time from the US Nationals, a meet he is the only men's swimmer right now that does not need to really rest in order to secure his spot on an international team. This is him just floating through, get what he needs to do in order to make his way onto the world's team, but he wasn't able to go any faster because early on in the meet, he definitely seemed to be affected by that food poisoning that was going through Team USA. So I expect this race between these two to be a lot faster than these entry times would suggest. I also think Rex Maurer could potentially make a move up in these top two. I think these two are pretty favorite. He's more of a spoiler candidate. He has yet to show a truly elite time in the 800 freestyle, but he could be trending in that direction. We don't really know right now, and we won't until this race is swum. And of course, down in 7th, we have Luka Mijatovic coming off of a very fast 1000 freestyle, only a little bit slower than what Jowdy actually went in a dual meet. So these two could be somewhat evenly matched. It's only about a couple seconds difference between them. And Carson Foster entered just ahead of Mijatovic. Foster, we saw swimming in the 800 and 1500 during the Swimming World Cup, basically just for fun. He wasn't even originally going to swim the other two stops after the first one, but went, hey, this is actually kind of fun. I'm going to enter into the other two meets because I want to keep doing this. He was never really challenging for the win in these, but he was staying with the leaders for at least a little bit and putting some pressure on them. So I wouldn't be surprised if he does the same thing here. Now, the women's 50 butterfly is not even remotely close. Gretchen Walsh seeded with a 24.66. Only Gretchen Walsh and Shara Sostrom have ever broken 25 seconds. Our number 2 seed, Caroline Larson, 26.06. Well over a second behind Gretchen Walsh. She is winning this easily. Now, the men's 50 butterfly is gearing up to be a lot more competitive than that women's one, where it's Gretchen Walsh and everyone else. Ilya Haroun definitely stands out on the psych sheet here as the only swimmer under 23 seconds, and by quite a bit with the 22.68. Dare Rose and Shane Casas are also in that 23 low range, 23.02 and 23.10. Then in fourth, Caleb Dressel, 23.28. This was his fastest from that tier championship meet, which again, he seemed to have been on a reduced training plan at the time. Wouldn't be surprised if he's faster than this and dips into the 22s if he has any kind of sufficient preparation for this meet rather than being dead tired, which I'm kind of leaning towards being the case. 50 butterfly, I think, has a potential to be Dressel's best swim of this meet. His butterfly definitely comes around first after any kind of break in training, or even he just has better results in season when he's tired. Seems to be a lot more of a natural butterflyer, comes a lot easier for him, at least just basing off of results. And a 50 butterfly, probably easier for him to put together than a 100 butterfly. Reagan Smith stands on top of the psych sheet for the women's 200 backstroke with a 2:04.29, a pretty healthy lead over Leah Shackley, who was a 2:05.99. But like I said, in the 100 backstroke, she can never get too comfortable just because of how deep the US women are in backstroke, though I do think she's probably the most comfortable in the 200 backstroke. As the distance goes on, the gap and the amount of comfort that she has should go up. In the men's 200 backstroke, we once again see Hubert Koch and Piotr Kotze pretty close together on the psych sheet, 153.19 and 153.36. These two are our gold and silver medalists from the World Championships. Pretty similar to how we saw them pretty close together on the psych sheet for the 100 backstroke, though this time they have flipped and Koch is ahead of Kotze. And again, I think either one of them could win it, but I'm going to give the edge to Koch because he is a lot more geared towards that 200 distance. Kate Douglas looks like she's sitting pretty comfortably in the women's 200 breaststroke. She is the reigning world champion and Olympic champion and has almost 4 seconds of a lead on the psych sheet over Alex Walsh, 2:18.50 compared to 2:22.45. Over on the men's side in the 200 breaststroke, we have AJ Pouch and Josh Murthini as our only two swimmers under 210, both of them being in the 208s, and they're pretty close together, 208.34 to 208.87. That should be an interesting race between those two, with a lot of other swimmers that we saw in the field in the 50 and 100 breaststroke that might be able to try and disrupt those top two. In the women's 100 freestyle, we have a very strong trio leading the way of Gretchen Walsh, Simone Manuel, and Kate Douglas, ranging from 52.78 down to 53.16. Those three are definitely a little bit ahead of the rest of the field as we then transition into some 53 mids and 54 highs, but we should see some fast swims out of this grouping as well. Over in the men's 100 freestyle, we have our American record holder, the newest addition of the 46-second club, Jack Alexi, with his seed time of 46.81. He is probably the man to beat in this race. He was looking really good over the summer, swimming multiple 46s. Then behind him is Patrick Salmon with a 47.47. He was also looking really good over the summer, really came into his own as a swimmer, split a 46 from a flying start, so he was looking really good all the way through. And then we have a pretty loaded field behind him. Chris Giuliano, Destin Lasco, Peter Kotze should be interesting, Shane Casas, and we can just go down and down and down. This is a loaded field. I always love a 100 freestyle, especially when it's as deep as this. Even the mornings to see who makes top 8 is probably going to be must-watch swimming. We have Summer McIntosh back in one of her premier events, 2:01.99, leading the way in the women's 200 butterfly, 3 seconds exactly over Reagan Smith at a 2:04.99 on the entry list. These two are now training together. Cannot imagine 200 butterfly practices. That sounds insane. And we also have some other talent behind them. Alex Shackle and Lindsay Looney stand out, but the show is going to be between Summer McIntosh and Reagan Smith. We're expecting McIntosh to win, but I think both these two are going to do something pretty fast. They're both obviously very fast in the 200 butterfly and are both pretty good at swimming fast in season, and we might see just how those practices play out when we see these two actually race head to head now that McIntosh has moved over to training in Texas. Then in the men's 200 butterfly, our final event, we see Leon Marchand at the top of the psych sheets, 151.21. That is his time from the Paris Olympics. He did not swim this event last summer during the World Championships, going just the IM, so it'll be interesting to see where he's at this point, but he's obviously an incredibly talented 200 butterflyer, as you might imagine, over 2 seconds to the lead over Ilya Haroun, who's also been looking very good in the 200 butterfly in general and more recently during the NCAA midseason. But that was every single event that we're going to see very soon during the US Open Championships. I think there are a ton of very exciting races, and I can't wait to see what some of these swimmers do. Like I said, I am most intrigued by Caleb Dressel and using this meet as a measuring stick for where he's at with his new training and where we can maybe expect to see him go going forward. Also, Luka Mijatovic has got to be a highlight for me just because he's been going so fast and dropping time repeatedly as teenagers do, so I can't wait to see him get in the mix as he keeps getting faster and faster and more ready to play with the big dogs. Other obvious top talent like Hubert Koch, Leon Marchand, Summer McIntosh, Regan Smith, Gretchen Walsh, all of them are going to be exciting to watch. A lot of those swimmers are swimmers that can go fast randomly or all the time, and in some of their premier events, you can always expect something interesting could happen. Specifically, Gretchen Walsh, she broke that 100 butterfly world record at a pro swim series, for example. Never can be too sure what's going to happen when she hits the water. Overall, there is a ton of exciting events that we are going to see during this meet, but which one are you the most excited for? Either which event or which swimmer? Let me know down below.